Pooja, I'll be back in a minute as well. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope I'm audible. I, Pooja Mathur, on behalf of CSR Box and the Habitats Trust, extend a very warm welcome to one and all present here. Thank you for joining us today. As you all may know, CSR Box is India's leading CSR knowledge and impact intelligence driven partnerships platform for the development community. It serves as an enabler, encouraging collaboration and partnerships between CSR stakeholders. At CSR Box, we bridge the knowledge gaps and information asymmetry by providing a range of services for NGOs and CSR teams to enhance their capacities, aid collaboration, publish knowledge resources, conduct research, amplify their reach, and much more. As partner and co-host with the Habitats Trust, we are conducting Pan-India virtual symposiums in an effort to bring together individuals, organizations, researchers, and policymakers onto one platform, such that they can deliberate upon how individuals and organizations can contribute towards conservation of sustainable ecosystems. The objective of these symposiums is to stir discussion regarding the protection and conservation of India's lesser known natural habitats and indigenous species of flora and fauna, as well as to inform individuals and organizations about the Habitats Trust grants and its application process. We hope you will find the program that we have lined up for you to be fruitful and engaging. To begin, please join me in welcoming Tanya Singh from the Habitats Trust to help us with an overview of the grants, the eligibility and the evaluation criteria, and the selection process for the 4 categories. Tanya, over to you.
Thank you so much, Pooja. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Like Pooja mentioned, I'm Tanya from the Habitats Trust grants team. To begin with, I would like to give you a brief overview about the Habitats Trust and then run you through the details about our flagship program, the Habitats Trust grants. Next. The Habitats Trust was founded 3 years ago in 2018 by Roshni Nadar Malhotra, the chairperson of HCL Technologies, and Shikhar Malhotra, the executive director and board member of HCL Corporation, who are both extremely passionate about wildlife and conservation. The aim of the Habitats Trust is to protect India's natural habitats and its indigenous species by establishing strategic partnerships, by focusing on on-ground efforts, by engaging technology for conservation, and through conservation awareness generation. We aim to provide support and recognition to passionate grassroots conservationists across the country and work towards innovative, sustainable, and replicable conservation initiatives on ground to secure our habitats and species. The mission of the Habitats Trust is to create and conserve sustainable ecosystems across India through strategic partnerships and collaborations with all stakeholders at all levels. Next. Okay, now coming to our flagship program, which is the Habitats Trust grants. In this presentation, I will run you through an overview about the grants, our past recipients, the eligibility criteria, and the evaluation process. Next. So the Habitats Trust grants were also initiated in 2018 with an aim to recognize and support organizations and individuals working tirelessly in the field to protect our natural habitats and indigenous species of flora and fauna. Under the grants program, we invite applications in 4 categories, 3 for organizations and 1 for individuals. For organizations, we have the Strategic Partnership Grant amounting to 35 lakhs, the Lesser Known Habitats Grant for 30 lakhs, and Lesser Known Species Grant for 25 lakhs. For individuals, we have the Conservation Hero Grant amounting to 15 lakh rupees. Also, over the years, we have increased the grant amount values too. And this year onwards, the grant will be administered over a duration of 2 years as opposed to 1. We felt that this would help us in increasing the conservation impact of our projects on ground. I would also like to mention that towards the end of our grants application process, 2 finalists in each category are awarded 10% of the category grant value to support their conservation efforts. Next. Okay, as you can see on this slide, the Habitats Trust grants are getting more and more competitive with an increased number of proposals being received every year. In 2020, we received the highest number of registrations and applications at 4,311 and 561 respectively. Next. In this slide, you can see our presence in different parts of the country. I would also like to mention that the largest number of applications received under the grants come from the northeast region of India, the Western Ghats, and parts of southern India. And this is reflective in our active projects as well as, like you can see on the map. So coming to our strategic partnership grant partners, they're denoted in dark blue color on the map. Towards the extreme west, we have the Corbett Foundation working in Abdasa in Great Run of Kutch. In northeast, we have Aranyak working in Manas National Park in Assam, and Foundation of Ecological Security working in Nagaland. Our lesser known habitats partners are denoted by the green color on the map. Down south in Tamil Nadu, we have Seeds Trust working in the Ayalur habitat. Towards the west, in Goa, we have Coastal Impact, and Reef Watch Marine Conservation have their project based out of Andaman Islands. Our lesser known species partners are denoted by the orangish color on the map. The Bat Conservation India Trust works in Kolar district in Karnataka. The Medastring Foundation works in different parts of the Western Ghats, whereas Sahyadri and Nisarga Mitra have been working in Konkan region of the Western Ghats. In yellow, we have our Conservation Hero Grant partners, M. Suraj in Chhattisgarh and Niti Mahesh in Coorg in Karnataka. Next. Okay, so in the first edition in 2018, the Habitats Trust grants awarded 50 lakh to organizations working to protect India's biodiversity. Our strategic partnership grant recipient, Foundation for Ecological Security, has been working to strengthen governance and management of community conserved areas in Nagaland. They aim to ensure protection of endangered and threatened species like Blitz tragopan, the Hoolock gibbon, the Chinese pangolin, and the Great Indian hornbill in 3 selected landscapes in Nagaland. Our lesser-known habitats grant partner, Reef Watch Marine Conservation, has been working on rehabilitating coral reefs in the Andaman Islands. Our lesser-known species grant partner, Sahyadri Nisarga Mitra, is working on the protection of the world's most trafficked mammal, the Indian pangolin, through community participation in the Konkan region. Next. Okay. In its second edition in 2019, the Habitats Trust grants awarded 70 lakhs to organizations and individuals combined. The strategic partnership grant winner, Aranyak, has been working on restoring the habitat of the last surviving wild population of pygmy hawks. The project aims to secure and recover Manas grasslands and its threatened species. Our lesser-known habitats grant recipient, Coastal Impact, has been working on coral transplantation aids for preservation of coral patches off the coast of Goa. Our lesser-known species partner, the Medastring Foundation, has been assessing the conservation status and needs of the Malabar tree toad through citizen-based field surveys. And lastly, our Conservation Hero Grant partner, Niti Mahesh, has been working on reviving traditional knowledge to restore the riparian habitat along the Kaveri River in Coorg district, Karnataka. Next. Last year, we also awarded 70 lakh to dedicated conservationists. We have the Corbett Foundation, who are working on conservation and recovery of the Great Indian Bustard. We have Seeds Trust, who is working along with tribals to conserve Ayalur habitat and its biodiversity in Tamil Nadu. We have Bat Conservation India Trust, who are working towards preventing the extinction of the Kolar leaf-nosed bat. And then lastly, we have M. Suraj, who is conducting anti-snare walks in protected areas of Chhattisgarh to curb poaching. So now to give you a brief idea about their work, you can check out the videos that we will now be playing. Deepak, we can move forward. Yeah.
With just 150 birds recorded worldwide, the Great Indian Bustard is on the brink of extinction. In India, the Kutch district of Gujarat is one of the last viable habitats, though only an all-female population of 6 individuals remain here. Their protected habitat in Kutch is limited to just 2 square kilometers, so these birds rely on the community grasslands of more than 40 villages in the area for their survival. The Corbett Foundation, which has been working to conserve the bustard in India, proposes to secure Great Indian bustard habitats in Kutch by engaging the local communities residing within a 220 square kilometer radius of the core bustard habitat through awareness and capacity building programs for better grassland management. The forests of Ayalur in Tamil Nadu are a lifeline for the communities that live alongside these forests and depend on them for their livelihoods. They're also home to an elusive and threatened primate, the grey slender loris. Anthropogenic usage beyond the natural regeneration capacity has degraded these forests, affecting both species diversity and tribal livelihoods. Seeds Trust has been working in Ayalur for over 2 decades with the vision of enabling local communities to become self-reliant and to conserve natural resources. Under the project, Seeds Trusts aim to reduce pressures on the Ayalur habitat by providing training to the communities on sustainable harvesting and cattle grazing methods. The rare and endemic kola leaf nosebat is found today in only one cave of Kolar district of Karnataka, where their numbers have decreased to just 150 to 200 individuals. Change in land use, stone quarrying, and rampant hunting for perceived medicinal purposes are driving these bats closer to extinction. Lack of information about the species is a major hurdle to conservation efforts. Bat Conservation India Trust has proposed an in-depth research to understand the behavior and ecological needs of the kola leaf nosebat so that necessary steps can be taken to protect them. Snares, used by both organized poaching syndicates and local hunters, pose a grave threat to wildlife in the protected areas of Chhattisgarh, which is among the hotspots for hunting and wildlife trade in India. For the past 9 years, M. Suraj has been working alongside authorities in Chhattisgarh to curb poaching and sensitize the community on the need to protect biodiversity. Under the project, he proposes to conduct anti-snare walks in hunting zones and train frontline forest staff and local community champions on anti-snaring activities.
Thank you so much, Deepak. I hope I'm audible now. You can also visit our YouTube channel to check out these videos and many more of our past recipients. And always you can drop us an email if you want to know about these projects. Now coming to the eligibility criteria for the grants. We can move forward. Yeah. So due to time constraints, I will only be able to go through this briefly. We strongly recommend you to visit our website and study the grant guidelines to thoroughly understand the eligibility criteria for the different categories. This will also help you determine what is the best category suited for the project you would like to propose. Please note that each category has been designed to address a specific conservation need of the country. To begin with, the Strategic Partnership Grant is primarily for mid to large-sized field-work-oriented organizations who have an annual expenditure of at least 50 lakhs. The organization must have completed 5 years of functional existence by March 2021 to be eligible to apply under this category. The grant is directed towards catering to the running costs of on-ground projects and also to create a two-way partnership between the Habitats Trust and the organization. Now, the lesser-known Habitats Grant is designed to pay attention to overlooked and unaddressed habitats across the country that need urgent conservation attention and care. And through this grant, we hope to bring these vital overlooked habitats into spotlight. To apply in this category, the organization must have completed 2 years of functional existence before March 2021. Our next category, the Lesser Known Species Grant, aims to provide conservation support to various lesser known endangered species of flora and fauna in India. you can have a look at our grant guidelines to get an idea of the indicative list of species. All the species you would like to propose to protect should be listed as threatened or data deficit as per the IUCN Red List or in Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act of India. While a lot of attention is bestowed upon charismatic species of the country, such as tigers and lions, leopards, rhinos, etc., this grant aims to bring species that are equally endangered and ecologically important, but unfortunately not well known, into the spotlight. The organization applying for this category must have completed 2 years of functional existence by, again, March 2021. Lastly, we have the Conservation Hero Grant that aims to champion the work of grassroots individual conservationists working dedicatedly with little to no support to protect India's biodiversity. The grant provides them a platform to expand their activities and garner further support for their work in conservation. While this grant is open to all individuals, it is important to note that these individuals should not be full-time employees or board members of any registered not-for-profit entities in India. Besides this, it's important to note that projects that engage local communities in their efforts are given more preference, and organizations applying must be a registered not-for-profit entity in India, that is either a society or a trust or a Section 8 or a registered institution under Section 3512. Again, I would like to mention that you should carefully read all grant guidelines given on our website before applying. Next. Now we come to the evaluation process. Next. Okay, listed here are the key evaluation criteria basis which your application would be evaluated. It is very important to keep these factors in mind while designing your project and while writing your proposal. Starting with the problem statement, this should justify the need of the proposed project, taking into account the on-ground reality and existing conservation efforts in the proposed location. Relevance. Does your project address key conservation issues, taking into account the context of the project location, that is population distribution, habitat conservation, and existing and upcoming threats, wildlife population, involvement of stakeholders, etc. Then coming to methodology, is there a pragmatic methodology to achieve the proposed objectives? Is there sufficient portion of the budget dedicated to carrying out the project activities? Are the activities methodologies well thought out and based on experience and research? Then expected conservation impact, which is extremely important. How strong is the expected on-ground impact of the proposed project? And are there any measures, indicators in place to assess the impact of the project? Then monitoring, evaluation, and documentation. How do you plan to monitor your project on an ongoing basis? Then coming to stakeholder engagement, does the project reach out to key stakeholders such as the forest department, enforcement agencies, local communities, farmers, students, etc. Then coming to sustainability, do you have a long-term strategy behind your proposed project? And does your proposal have a component of sustainability? Do you have strong fundraising skills? Does the proposed project fall into the current conservation context, enabling you to further your work? Then lastly, coming to replicability, can the project be replicated on a large or small scale while based at different locations? Also beyond this, you will also be evaluated upon your capacity to deliver and your past projects and similar past experience that you have. We can move forward. Okay. So this is the last slide. And in this last slide, we will talk about the evaluation process of the Habitats Trust grants. So the recipients of the grants is selected through a very structured, robust, and extremely transparent process that I will run you through. The first round is the first level screening and shortlisting. Successfully submitted applicants and projects will be screened for eligibility, relevance of answers, and authenticity of information. A team of experts, including sector specialists and external auditors, evaluate the successful entries, after which 28 shortlisted applications move to the field verification round. That is the next round. In the field verification round, our team visits the project sites for shortlisted applicants who are screened further for relevance and expected impact of their proposed project. Basis this, qualitative and quantitative scores are assigned to each applicant. In the third round, the sub-jury panelists shortlist 3 applicants in each category. and also keep in mind the field level verification scores. Another level of due diligence is conducted at this stage by our grant audit partners, after which in the last stage, the applicants present their proposed projects to the Habitats Trust grants jury. Well, that's it from my side. Please let us know if you have any queries in the Q&A section, or you can directly email us also. And you can also log into our website to know more details. And thank you so much, everyone. Over to you, Pooja.
Thank you so much, Tanya, for that detailed overview. In developing economies like India, characterized by the shift of resources and political focus from the agrarian sector to manufacturing and services sectors, it has been observed that there is an ever-increasing pressure on its environmental goods and ecosystem services. The trade-off between development and environment is increasingly being recognized as unaccounted negative environmental externalities loom large in the purview of natural capital assessments in India. While the economic valuation of nature is quite debated on ethical grounds, natural capital accounting and payments for ecosystem services is now being increasingly discussed on national and international forums. Natural capital assessment and sustainable use can pave a new way for development from the bottom up, led by stalwarts of our natural resources, our indigenous communities. To talk more in this context, next up, we have a special masterclass that you've all been waiting for. I would now like to invite Mr. Saurav Malhotra, co-founder of Balipara Foundation, to facilitate a masterclass on economic valuation of nature and community forest management in the northeastern regions of India. Saurav heads the management of the Balipara Foundation and is the lead architect and designer of the Rural Futures Program, which aspires to integrate ecological gains with upward socio-economic mobility for forest fringe communities across the eastern Himalayan region. Through Rural Futures, Saurabh and his team mobilize forest fringe communities, especially youth, to engage in the complete value chain of ecosystem restoration. Sustainable restoration and harvest of nature builds natural capital, which the community utilizes to deliver universal basic assets locally and autonomously. We welcome you, Mr. Saurabh, and look forward to an engaging session.
Thank you so much, Pooja, everyone else from CSR Box and the Habitats Trust team. I can see Trisha, who I know, and the new Habitats Trust members, Tanya and Sunaina. Nice to meet all of you. I have a quick presentation that I'm going to use as a guide for this talk. And I mean, natural capital is an increasingly popular theme in the area of conservation. But I think that we are still figuring out how to make best use of it and figuring out pathways by which our communities can benefit through natural capital. So I'm going to take you through a lot of the work and knowledge frameworks that we have developed over the last 10 years, and a lot of the action that we are doing on the ground to help realize the values of natural capital. So really, this is a bit of a historical context to say the growth of humans on Earth, and also, unfortunately, how that coincided with an increase in deforestation on Earth. So we really began about 7,000 years ago as an agrarian civilization and began clearing of forests to make way for agriculture. This was great. I mean, we got food security, we domesticated animals, and sort of created the first sort of human-based economy on Earth. This was followed by the industrial age, in which everything had to be better, brighter, faster, and cheaper. But this unfortunately consumed a lot of fossil fuels, and therefore resulting in the current climate crisis that we're going through. This led to rapid and massive economic growth, not for the entirety of the world, but for a certain few, and led to the digital revolution. The beginning of the digital revolution was still powered by carbon-based energy, and unfortunately still about 70% of the digital world is run on carbon-based energy. But the digital world actually gave us a lot to think about, and a lot of new techniques and a lot of data, ways in which we could analyze data to begin to do good. We are currently at this interesting juncture where we can take multiple pathways for the future. And how we create this new future is actually dependent on us and all of us together. What we propose as the only possible resilient future is the naturenomics way, or the ecological way, in which we need to be able to synthesize the best qualities of agrarian, of industrial, of digital, and create a future which is good for us all and not just for a few. So the scenario today, out of the 7 billion people that live in the world, about half of them live in rural areas. About 1.5 billion people depend directly on forests for livelihood, but the others that do not depend directly still need the forests for life on Earth. The value of the world's natural capital, commodities, and ecosystem services is valued at about $33 trillion. And India's natural capital is currently valued at about $53 billion. Unfortunately, a lot of the values are used, and natural capital values have been used since the beginning of human life on Earth to benefit a few, but to leave the majority, and especially our communities who guard our forests and our natural assets, in a state of poverty. How we make the best use of it? I think there is a great opportunity in the greater Eastern Himalayan region. I know that I'm supposed to be talking about the northeast of India today, but in fact, it's quite impossible to talk about the northeast of India without talking about our neighboring countries of Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, and Myanmar, especially because a lot of the habitats that we have are contiguous within these regions. The market potential of the Eastern Himalayas is estimated at about 220 million. A huge portion of this lies in Bangladesh, which is currently the epicenter of the climate crisis in Asia, and probably the second most important spot for the climate crisis in the world, leaving out the poles. The opportunity that we have with us in the Eastern Himalayas is that about 80% of our farmers are still small farmers that use low chemical and non-invasive techniques. We have about 25% of our ecosystems that are still intact. 50% of our land in this entire region is forested. A lot of this data is also true for the northeast of India. So the opportunity that we see here is to bring wealth back to the forests. And when we say back, it refers to the pre-agrarian age where wealth belonged in the forests and human foraged for food in the forests. And in fact, humans have been important in the growth of many forests and the increase of biodiversity of many forests, such as the Great Amazon rainforest. How we think we can power growth in the future is by using the natural capital values that nature has always provided us. We have abused a lot of it, but it is now time that we optimize the use of natural capital and link values to commodities and to services that have not been valued in the past. Natural capital broadly, I mean, we consider trees as natural capital, we consider water as natural capital, but we rarely look at the ecosystem cycles that actually allow life on Earth, the oxygen cycle or the carbon cycle. Also, in fact, the regulation of diseases on Earth and the regulation of the prevention of zoonotic diseases is in fact a very important service that our forests provide us, but we do not have a value for that yet. In terms of commodities, we know that commodities like timber, firewood, fruits, medicines that we get from the forest do have values. We have not optimized these values, and even if we have, a lot of these values rest in the hands of a few and not of the people who actually guard them. We believe that this total economic value that we derived from nature, both the invisible values and the commodities that we can directly trace, will be the future for our communities and is the only possible future for Northeast India and for the Eastern Himalayan region. Northeast India presents a fantastic opportunity because we have a lot of protected areas, not in Assam anymore, but in sort of many other areas in the northeast of India. And many of these areas are protected by the government. We also have about 24% of India's forests, and we present a potential of 527 billion rupees as an economic potential of our natural capital. Unfortunately, the northeast of India was the center where 74% of India's deforestation happened in 2019. Northeast India happens to be the place in India where industrialization has not yet kicked in. I think a lot of our policies indicate that the industrial way is the only way, but we'd like to challenge that by saying that the industrial way is not the way. for Northeast of India, but rather it is the ecological way. And the only possible ecological way is if we integrate growth of the ecology with growth of the economy. How we do that is based on a proprietary framework that we've developed at the Balipara Foundation called Naturenomics. And how we implement Naturenomics on the ground and realize natural capital potentials is through rural futures. The rural futures model depends on the restoration of land by communities, on the management of land by communities, and how we derive sustainable livelihoods through this management and sustainable use process. At the epicenter of rural futures lies forestry and how we transform forest management and reforestation. So a typical rural futures program begins by involving communities, especially youth, in habitat restoration. And this habitat restoration is a complete science-based habitat restorations where we try and recreate the ecosystem as it was. We do understand that there is no recipe to create a forest, but I think the best that we can do through science is by identifying the kind of species that exist in core areas of forests and trying to replicate them as far as possible through human hands. When we begin this process of restoring forests, indigenous communities are economically incentivized and therefore creating a first level of economic mobility. And then in the future, the natural capital harvests from this forests, sustainable timber, fruits, medicines, bamboo, wild mushrooms, all lead to a source of revenue that is managed by communities. Communities decide what kind of social assets they want to deliver for themselves using this revenue. It could be healthcare systems, it could be education, it could be systems for better drinking water. We focus a lot of our efforts on building community capacity in being able to manage the forest, in building community capacity for citizen sciences, and in building community capacity for sustainable businesses. A lot of these sustainable businesses drive the further restoration of habitats, and this works in a positive feedback loop model. Agriculture is a very, very important part of forestry as well as the economy in the northeast of India, because also a lot of our forests have been and are being cleared for agriculture, whether systematic or uncontrolled. We use agroforestry as a technique to increase the value of land by almost fourfolds. And this agroforestry is based on the indigenous heritage knowledge of communities to secure individual households for food, to secure individual communities for food, and then only using the excesses to trade with local markets first and then markets that are far away. So the focus really is on localization, not on isolation, but on a localization that is resilient. Agriculture and agroforestry, in fact, present great opportunities for high-value secondary businesses. We are currently working on a co-creation partnership with the Impulse NGO network to introduce end-to-end cycles for yarn, silk, and indigenous cotton. So communities that are involved in weaving can, in fact, grow their own cotton in the same village, and we drive entrepreneurship across the value chain of the product within same communities. How this entire process works is that it is important to identify land and important to identify communities that live on the degraded land, which is unfortunately not very hard to come by. Communities partake in the restoration of habitats and derive economic value through this and restore natural capital in the process. This restore natural capital from, say, a phase of 3 years onwards to 30 years when the complete forest matures, gain natural capital values from this. And these are currently, we're just talking about commodity values because we still don't have a system for a lot of the other values in the world, but especially not in India. And I will come to that in a bit. But we have been able to prove that the restoration of nature by communities and that the sustainable use of nature from communities can create a pathway for a constant flow of revenue to communities, and that this revenue can be used for enhancing social mobility. I'm just going to show you a small video now, which actually, is from the ground and shows you a bit about what I'm talking about.
মই বৰবাৰী প্ৰজেক্টটো মই চাই আছোঁ বালিয়া ফাউণ্ডেশ্যনৰ হৈ আৰু মই ইয়াত আমাৰ গাঁৱত 157টা এগ্ৰ' ফৰেষ্ট্ৰি আছে আৰু এইটো এটা মডেল হয়। ইয়াতো আমি গাঁৱত ফুড ফৰেষ্ট কৰিছোঁ। ফুড ফৰেষ্টত আপোনাৰ কি হয়, আমি সাইডত মানে ডাঙৰ গছবোৰ লগাওঁ ডাঙৰ গছবোৰ যেনেকৈ আপোনাৰ সজিনা গছৰ লগত কিছুমান আৰু সাইডত মানে আমাৰ গছ লগাওঁ এনেকৈ আপোনাৰ ফলমূলৰ গছৰ লগত আমি পাণ চান লগাওঁ পাণ চান তাৰপিছত আকৌ এনেকৈ মাজত অমিতা লগাইছো তাৰপিছত জলকীয়া তাৰপিছত নেমু আৰু কিছুমান মেডিচিনেল প্লান্টও আছে আৰু গছৰ ফ্ৰণ্টত আমি ফুলৰ মানে বিউটিফিকেশ্যনৰ কাৰণে ফুল লগাইছো আৰু ফলৰ যোনটো গ্ৰাউণ্ড লেয়াৰৰ কাৰণে আমি পাম্পকিন আছে চুইট পটেটো সেইবোৰ লগাইছো এতিয়া 157টা হৈছে আৰু 350 হাউচ হোল্ড আছে সব হাউচ হোল্ডতে আমি ফুড ফৰেষ্টটো কৰিম বুলি ভাবিছো আৰু আমাৰ নাৰ্চাৰীও বনাইছো যোনটো আমি অমিতা জলকীয়া সেইকেইটা আছে সেইটো আমি ডিষ্ট্ৰিবিউট কৰি আছো এতিয়া লাহে আৰু আমি প্লেন কৰিছো এইটো মাহৰ পৰা আমি সজিনা কাটিং নেমু কাটিং আৰু বেঙেনা এনেকা নাৰ্চাৰীত কৰি গাঁৱতে ডিষ্ট্ৰিবিউট কৰিম
So in fact, through programs like this, we facilitate in the transformation of land, facilitate in the regeneration of land, and in fact allow communities to derive more revenue from land than they have before. On this slide, you see a typical representation of natural capital. Over the last sort of 20 years and the progress of science and economics, we have been able to classify natural capital across scales of commodities as well as ecosystem-based services. So a lot of these values are in fact tangible and available to communities. NTFP values, photo values, timber values. Values such as that of carbon have still not been tapped in the majority of the world, although these systems are functioning really well in areas like Latin America. And then there's systems for measuring the value of soil loss, water recharge, and the avoidance of floods. But many of these, we still have not figured out how to use them, but there are sort of ways in which risks can be assessed and therefore insured in a preventive way from floods from happening in the future. What we do know works and what we have seen work over the last 5 years of our work on the ground is in fact the classification of nature and nature-based products into these 4 broad categories. These categories consist of living, sort of natural assets that are used by people for their everyday lives, such as bamboo, cane, jute, timber. These consist of healthcare and derivative healthcare products like medicinal plants, medicinal mushrooms, but also the fact that we have clean air and you are being able to reduce pollution by creating a forest. And there's of course food, because a lot of the direct food for indigenous communities still come from the forest, and a lot of these have actual values on the ground. And then there's also the biodiversity values, natural assets, and ecosystem services provided by the ecology. So this sort of commodification of the outputs of a forest or the outputs of an agroforest, in fact, already give you tangible gains from natural capital, which can be used by communities. So a simple system of enhancing natural capital by reforesting or by optimizing the values of land, by creating systems and pathways by which communities can equitably share profit and liquidate this natural capital in local economies or in export-based economies and deliver universal basic assets through this is the only possible future for the area. These natural capital banks not only create social assets, but also create jobs. And in this entire region, or in fact, in the entire subcontinent, economic mobility is unfortunately a prerequisite for social mobility and a prerequisite for creating resilient communities. What we see is that social mobility and economic mobility through a lot of our surveys, in fact, form the basis for creating communities that feel well and for communities that will be able to sustain themselves in the long run, and communities that will have adaptive and mitigative capacities to the disaster, to the impending disasters from climate change. Through optimizing natural capital, we can in fact not only transform the way social assets are delivered in rural economies, but we can also transform work. And this is the only possible way in which a sustainable transformation for work and employment can happen in the Northeast. And this is more important now than ever because of the inbound migration that has happened during COVID and after COVID. So we see a lot of future growth sectors. Many of these are already being tapped into, some of these which can be tapped into, but this is the future of work. And this is how we realize the capacities of natural capital. Here's another short video on how work for women and entrepreneurship can be created around something as small as mushrooms.
নমস্কাৰ মই কামিনী দুচিলা মিলি অংক বালিকা মোৰো মানে টাকার কেতিয়া মেঞ্জিও অঙ্কলং বিটা বালিকা আমি পাঁচ পয়সা পঙ্গে না আধা ঘন্টা কো আসিরো জিও পঙ্গে এন্ডু লংপা কোন দলো লাডাক কো না আধা ঘন্টা কো লাঙ্গে না উডনি দই রম তো লগে না পেকিং মকো পেকিং পাঁচ আমি পেকিং মকে মানে ছেলেরম আমি মুই উড়ে কিনলে কিনলে আপু বড়াই পেকিং মনে আর 15 দিন কো কমন অঙ্কলর মগে নাই আপু আরম 15 দিন পিছত খুলি পাব 15 দিন পিছত 2-3 দিন ইলি রক মানে এ করে এর এলেন ডাকবো প্রবলেম লাগবো মুলু 28 প্যাকেট ওইডাং বরম প্রবলেম মলাই মানে পিলনা তো মুট কম মলেন না কমলো 40-45 কেজি রক লেন্ডাং নোমা 10-15 হাজার করে যাবো কত যতই পাবো টাইম ফুল নাই না
Oke, jadi kok tapal keti mana dulu? Rojoni. Kabar mau orang tapal keti? Udah rumah. Kalau yang keti ba belek keti moyam dulu tuh kosto besi dah tapal keti sudah kosto ini. Kosto mah. Aduh lap deh kami dah. Hukum Korea dapat tapal keti dah poisa kuilan. Dua दिन pada soalnya nana pembijaan ini kan. Ya, aduh dulu. Ini dulu kok semua binaan tapal keti dah kamu. Malam tu kan orangnya apa? Dapat kirim ke bayar list dia ambil. Orang tu mau apa apa lagi ni? Dorting ke bagi dia. Jadi orang ni pun.
Amun bemar kamago মানে গরম তো কাম্পুন তালাপ দম 100 গ্রাম কো দম কেনা এম কো 80 রকম বাগে না গরম স্প্রে মোরা না ডাক মুগারো কম কমিশন কম সিন সলিনা না ডাক পুরা একদম সিন দলনা না ডাক আপা কেতি না কাম দেশিন দিতে কষ্ট মা আপা কেতি যা এগে কেতি বলি তো আই উগি আরা কো দিন দাই মলো মানে আইয়ারা কো না কেতি না আপা কেতি সি
So in fact, I'd just like to sort of summarize the entirety of this talk in a way that a roadmap, a possible roadmap for being able to enhance natural capital and for being able to use this natural capital is through the bottom up. We need to be able to run community-based programs that restore our forests and that restore agricultural land. I do understand that there are many policy challenges and there's many large-scale agriculture challenges that we have to combat, and we have to combat this together as a community. But if we are able to train communities from the bottom up to restore habitats and to derive values from these habitats that are based on local economies and not based on economies far away, communities are then able to use natural capital to deliver access to food, to water, to education, and a whole bunch of other basic assets which form the basis of life. And it is now time that we in fact use the values provided by nature to create communities in the Northeast, to create communities in the entire Eastern Himalayan belt, which are resilient and which are on the right path for economic growth and the growth of ecology. And if it isn't for our forests in this region, we don't have a future. Thanks a lot. I'd be happy to answer any questions, Pooja.
Thank you so much, Saurabh, for that really wonderful and thought-provoking session. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A section. Let me just read them out to you, and then you can probably answer them live.
Sure.
First question is from Rajat. Interesting data shared by Saurabh. If we need to scale this up and see 53 billion assets, which can further generate additional revenue, and hence we need to think through innovative approach, how can HNI be allowed to channelize their additional fund to invest and get returns?
Yeah, in fact, Rajat, I think, yeah, Rajat, that's a fantastic question and something that we have been exploring. And we actually have an economic model which gives you something to the order of a 12% return on investment. This is something that is currently being validated by the London School of Economics, and we should have a complete paper out very, very soon. But this is the only way to invest in the future, and we can make that happen.
Thank you, Saurabh. There is another question which has been asked anonymously. When you say you want to return the forest back to what it was, what is the timeline that you're working with? Agroforestry in Northeast has traditionally been shifting cultivation, which has been dynamic as an inherent nature. How are you looking at the indigenous knowledge which is evolving as a response to changing disturbance regimes and returning back to forest as it used to be in terms of time? Secondly, how is your methodology different from FRA? Thank you for a wonderful talk.
So to answer the first question, it is really interesting because there is hardly any data, say, from prior to 1960, or at least we don't have satellite data prior to 1960, but there are survey maps and sort of evidences of forest cover from about 1880 onwards. What we are trying to do is to use artificial intelligence and satellite data to identify high priority areas. We have been able to go back till about 1980 using this kind of data, and that really is our benchmark. But typically, and in the ideal state, I'd like to know what the forests were like 7,000 years ago, but I'm not sure if that is possible. And I think the second question that you asked was in terms of agroforestry and using indigenous knowledge. In fact, I mean, I do agree that indigenous knowledge is evolving, and probably indigenous knowledge should evolve with the changing times. What we try and do is we, based on these Landsat maps, we try and ensure that we reforest areas that were forested, and we try and promote agroforestries on areas that have been under agricultural cultivation. The way this agroforestry happens is based on the data that we collect from indigenous communities, and the agroforestry model is then customized based on your ecological knowledge and based on the requirements of your household and your communities. Shifting cultivation is a very interesting topic and has been heavily discussed. I mean, the only thing that I would say to that effect is that I mean, it is still a very ecologically responsible way of doing agriculture, which allows land to regenerate. But unfortunately, because of the high population, especially in areas like Assam, it doesn't seem to be feasible anymore. I mean, and I know that there are government policies trying to block that or trying to prevent shifting cultivation from happening in areas like Mizoram and Manipur, which will not be productive for indigenous communities in the long run.
Thank you, Saurabh. I also see a couple of questions based on scalability. Manish, Pompey, and Ritesh asks, so can you throw some light on the scalability of such projects?
Yeah. I think programs like this or sort of innovations can be scaled, but scalabilities have their challenges. And I mean, how I see it, and I can talk from my own experience and from my experience with other partners in the Northeast, is that it is really important, to have a vision and not just a program that is based on a grant, right? If you have a vision and you've been able to raise resources and you've been able to test your resources on the ground, test your vision on the ground using these resources over a period of time, and you have good data to prove that this innovation or this model actually works in a couple of areas, Scalability works. I think if organizations try and scale everywhere on their own, try and scale in every state and try and scale in every country on their own, most of these efforts don't work. So how we see scale is through partnership. We see scale through developing a network of partners, grassroots partners who already have an existing network in the area. And by actually trying to drive and decentralize implementation to indigenous communities. So currently we implement in a way that we train indigenous youth to carry on the actual implementation of the program, and we simply act as facilitators. So the only way I think to scale effectively and fast, because we need to be able to do it fast, is to create a network that is robust enough and for it to be okay for you to let go of your innovation and to hand over to communities to take forward.
Thank you so much, Saurabh, for those wonderful answers. And I think we have covered almost most of the queries. There are a few more queries in the Q&A section, but since we are shooting over time a little, I would really hope that we can move to the next section of our event today.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Saurabh. I would now like to invite Trisha Ghosh and Tanya from the Habitats team, from the Habitats Trust, to help us with a few queries that we received in our last symposium and discuss a few frequently asked questions. We will also be joined by the audit partners Grant Thornton Bharat for questions related to compliance and governance in the application form. I'd request participants to kindly use the Q&A function to type in any additional questions that you may have regarding eligibility, application form, application process, evaluation criteria, etc. In case we are unable to answer all of your queries due to paucity of time, we will address them in our next virtual symposium on 19th March. I'll put the registration link in the chat box here again. It's already there. For those who came in late, I'll put it again. You will also find a link to the application form in the chat box here, along with a link to the application form walkthrough video for your perusal. Over to you, Tanya.
Thank you so much, Pooja. Okay, so to begin with, we can move on to the next slide, to the questions. So, okay. So to start with, a very commonly asked question, can I include any other rare species that is not included in the 42 endangered species list mentioned in the guidelines?
To answer that question, Tanya, the 42 endangered species list is more of an illustrative list to kind of give our applicants an idea of what kind of species we'd like to see applications on. Also to kind of describe what we mean by a lesser known species. We do accept applications on species which are not included on this list, but they should be listed as threatened or data deficit on the IUCN Red List. Additionally, we accept species which are listed on Schedule 1 of the Indian Wildlife Protection Act. However, if you are applying for a species that's not on the list of 42 species, you must support that with a very pragmatic conservation action plan and a very strong statement of need.
Okay, thanks. Moving on to the next question, can I apply for conservation of flora and plant species?
Absolutely. We also have 5 to 6 floral species included in our list of 42 species.
Okay, the next one is, can I apply for more than one grant at a time?
So an applicant can only apply for one grant category each year. So for example, if you're applying for the strategic partnership grant, you cannot apply for the lesser known habitat or lesser known species grant, and vice versa if you're applying for the lesser known grant categories as well.
Can I email post my application, that is send it as a hard copy?
So we do not accept applications except for our online application portal, which is www.thehabitatstrust.org/grants. However, there are some extenuating circumstances which may occur, for example, internet shutdowns or natural disasters which cause communication blackouts. So in those cases, very exceptional cases, we have accepted applications offline. If you believe you would be eligible or you are facing one of those extreme situations, you can get in touch with the Habitats Trust team at thehabitatstrust@hcl.com, and we will let you know if we are open to considering your application offline.
Okay. So I work for a for-profit company or enterprise. Can I apply for the Conservation Hero Grant?
So the quick answer to that is yes, you are eligible. For the Conservation Hero Grant, you must not be a full-time employee on the management board or on the board of trustees for a registered not-for-profit in India.
Okay. Another question is something which is really commonly asked. What is the difference between recommendations and references?
So yes, over the years, we've been asked this question many, many times. So recommendations are only applicable for individuals. Your recommendations can come from your mentors, your colleagues. It can even come from your studies, wherever, your thesis, etc. Recommendations don't necessarily have to come from people who are familiar or working with you on ground on the proposed project. References must come from people who are working in the landscape where you are proposing your project, who are familiar with the kind of work you have done on ground, and can attest to the fact that you have the capacity to deliver on the project you're proposing.
So next question. I have applied for my not-for-profits registration certificates, but have not received them as of now. Am I eligible to apply?
So for the strategic partnership grant category, you must have all your documents in place before applying. We are slightly more lenient with the lesser known habitats and lesser known species grant categories. So if you have applied for your registration certificates, we will give you time till the sub-jury round, which is about 6 months from the date that you put in your application. If by that time you have not received your documents, then we would be unable to take your application forward towards the final round. We do give you a grace period till then, 6 months grace period.
Can I apply for the same project applied for in the previous grant cycle, like in 2020, 19?
So if you have applied for a project and you have been unsuccessful, yes, you can reapply for that project. But it's very important to understand why your first application was unsuccessful. You can get in touch with the Habitats Trust team. Alternatively, we suggest you go again and look at the grant guidelines to understand whether you met all of the eligibility, because there's really no point in applying again with the ditto application because you may be unsuccessful again, and we wouldn't want to put you through that.
Yeah. Now coming to the last frequently asked question, can a professor or research scholar from an academic institution apply for the grant?
So if you're a government affiliated academic institution and you have a section 35(1)(2), then you can apply for any of the organizational grant categories. If you're part of a private institution, then you would apply as an individual for the Conservation Hero Grant.
Okay. Thank you so much, Trisha. I would now like to invite the Grant Thornton Bharat team to please help us address a couple of more queries. Sudhi, Chirag, whosoever would like to address these queries. So number one, most frequently asked question. I do not have an ATG 35(1)(2) 12A FCRA audited accounts. Can I apply for the Strategic Partnership Grant?
Thanks, Tanya. Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Sudhi this side from Grant Thornton. So Trisha mentioned some time back, I'll just re-emphasize on the statement that any organization applying under Strategic Partnership Grant, lesser known Habitats Grant and lesser known Species Grant must have registration under Section 12A, ATG or 35(1)(2) of Income Tax Act. Though again, as Trisha mentioned, for the Strategic Partnership Grant, you need to have 12A and ATG registration in place. But for the other two categories, the organizations have been given time till the sub-jury, which is about 6 months. And if you are able to get the registration within that time, TST will consider your application.
Okay, thanks. And also to add, the FCRA is not necessary to apply for the grant.
Yes, FCRA is not applicable here. True.
Then moving on, is renewal of 12A and ATG under new registration procedure under Section 12AB mandatory for applying for the Habitats Trust grants?
Okay, so this is to update you that the timelines for the renewal has been deferred and extended to April 1st, 2021 by the taxation and other laws. Hence, the new provisions related to charitable trust or other institutions now will be applicable from financial year 21-22.
Okay, thanks. Can a new not-for-profit organization apply for grants for organizations?
Yes, so it's a kind request to all the organizations who are willing to apply for the THD grant. We request you please go through the THD guidelines in detail. Answering to Tanya's question, there are different grant requirements for individual category. To begin with strategic partnership grant, organization needs to have 5 years of functional experience as per the registration certificate of the organization, which is in India or on before 31st of March 2021. For lesser known habitats grant, the functional experience period is 2 years, and same is with lesser known species grant, which is again 2 years.
Okay. Can a research association / institution apply for the grant?
Well, yes, an association institute having a valid registration under Section 35(1)(2) of the Income Tax Act can also apply for the grant.
Yeah. Again, I think we've already addressed this question. If
Yes.
FCRA is FCRA registration, so I'll just skip this. Then expenditure of more than INR 50 lakh for strategic partnership grant should be pertaining to which financial year?
So the financial year which is applicable in this case would be 2019 to 2020.
Okay.
I'll
What
again repeat
financial
this response maybe. The expenditure which we would be considering for evaluation would be financial year 2019 to 20.
Okay. Now, coming to the last question, what financial documents are needed to apply for the Conservation Hero Grant?
So an individual applying for the Conservation Hero Grant needs to have a PAN card, an Aadhaar card, a bank statement, and a proof of tax if applicable.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Sudhi, for taking the time and joining us. I would now be taking up additional queries that we have received in the Q&A section that have already not been addressed. Okay, great. Trisha, if you can just help us out with this. First one, I will, because we're short on time, I'll just be able to take 2-3 important questions. The first one is from Priya. Can individuals working on conservation and education apply for a grant? Is art and education an area for the grants?
So yes, we do consider programs which are also built around conservation awareness generation. But what is important to remember is that one of our key evaluation criteria is the expected conservation impact, which is the impact you're creating on ground. So how does your conservation education program result or create change on the ground?
Another question that we can take up is by Mr. Sunil Dubey. So he's from Rajasthan. So in Rajasthan, we have many plant species that are under threat due to either overharvesting, destruction in past, or due to various anthropogenic pressures at present. Can we expect support for such efforts? Efforts something like seed bank and sapling for nursery development through seed germination, etc.
So absolutely, we do look at supporting programs like that. We have supported a similar program in the past, but what's very important again to remember is that we want to see the benefit to biodiversity. So these seed banks, these sapling generations should not only be for commercial purposes, they should not only be for income generation purposes, but should also create a long-term or long-lasting effect for the threatened species that are present in your project area.
Another question that is coming from Srishti Kumari is that an organization should be functional for 5 years in which area? Is it necessary that the organization has been working in conservation of habitats?
So yes, we have a two-pronged approach. If you look at the actual grant guidelines, we say that you need 5 years of functional experience as per your registration certificate. That means that your organization should be in existence for 5 years. We also prescribe that organizations must be working for 5 years on conservation programs. So many organizations have started working on conservation initiatives and may actually have 7 to 8 years of conservation experience. However, only 5 years of functional existence as per their registration certificate. But yes, conservation experience is also a criteria to apply for the grants.
Great. So I think we have time for another question?
I think we can take a couple more questions and then we can probably wrap for today.
Okay. So an applicant is asking that I would like to know which category of trust programs target such types of efforts focusing on habitats which are at the junction of forest zones and agricultural lands and river streams. This is from Deepak Sharma.
Okay, so Tanya, this question, let's not get into too much detail about. If you want to know about our pre-existing programs, we do have information available on all of these programs as well as videos of the applicants' works on our website, www.thehabitatstrust.com. For today, we're going to focus more on queries regarding applying for the grants.
Okay. So I think we have covered mostly all questions. I mean, I can see many questions regarding, can we apply from this state, that state? I would just like to clarify, you can apply from any part of the country. And yeah, I think
any part of the country, you must be an organization that is registered in India and your proposed project must be based in India as well.
Yeah. Okay, I think that covers it all. Thank you so much, Trisha, for helping us address all these queries. Pooja, over to you again.
Thank you so much, team, for addressing these queries. I hope this session has resolved some of the queries for the participants, in fact, most of the queries. Participants, if you still have any questions that may not have been answered today, do put it in the Q&A section, or you can even put it in the registration form when you register for our next symposium on 19th March. You will find a question or comment section in the registration form itself. We'll pick your questions from there too and address them in the next symposium. With this, we come to a close for today's symposium. Before wrapping up for the day, I would like to acknowledge and appreciate our esteemed speaker, Mr. Saurabh Malhotra, who took out the time of from his busy schedule and showered us with his knowledge. We are truly humbled by your presence. Thank you once again. I would also like to extend my thanks to all of you for being such a wonderful audience. Please note that we have another symposium lined up for 19th March, that is next Friday. Kusum from our team has already pasted the registration link for the same in the chat box for all of you to register. In the next symposium, we will talk about a few more essential details pertaining to the grants and its application process, and we'll take queries regarding the application form and process. We have also curated an exciting masterclass for you on the role of technology for conservation, and will be joined by Mr. Shashank Srinivasan, co-founder and director of Technology for Wildlife. So stay tuned and do register. With this, we take your leave and wish you all a great day ahead.